Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. We are following breaking news amid intensifying clashes in Minnesota as the president now weighs a major escalation, threatening to deploy the U.S. military against the protesters. The president today saying he will invoke an 18th century law called the Insurrection Act if Minnesota's leaders don't put a stop to the protests. That law authorizes presidents to deploy military combat troops domestically to suppress rebellion or domestic violence. Trump administration officials today defending the president's threat after a top Justice Department official accused state and local leaders of, quote, terrorism.
The Insurrection Act is a tool at the president's disposal. As you know, it has been used sparingly, but it has been used by previous presidents in American history.
You know, I spoke to the president this morning about several different things, but we did discuss that. And that certainly is within the president's constitutional authority to use that if he thinks he needs to keep people safe.
The White House threats come after another night of intensifying clashes in Minneapolis, including a federal agent shooting a man in the leg during an operation to arrest him. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem saying that agent feared for his safety after he was attacked by two other men armed with, quote, weapons and shovels and brooms while the officer was trying to make an arrest. Officers on the scene fired flashbangs and sprayed chemical agents at protesters. Minnesota's leaders speaking out last night, calling the situation on the ground chaotic.
2,000 to 3,000 armed agents of the federal government have been deployed to Minnesota. Armed, masked, undertrained ICE agents are going door to door, ordering people to point out where their neighbors of color live. They're pulling over people indiscriminately, including U.S. citizens, and demanding to see their papers. And at grocery stores, at bus stops, even at our schools, they're breaking windows, dragging pregnant women down the street, just plain grabbing Minnesotans and shoving them into unmarked vans, kidnapping innocent people with no warning and no due process.
And we're in a position right now where we have residents that are asking the very limited number of police officers that we have to fight ICE agents on the street, to stand by their neighbors. We cannot be at a place right now in America where we have two governmental entities that are literally fighting one another.
Today, Minnesota's governor responding to the president's threat to send in military troops, telling him, quote, let's turn the temperature down. Stop this campaign of retribution. This is not who we are. Governor Walz also making an appeal to Minnesotans to not, quote, fan the flames of chaos. Joining me now is NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster in St. Paul, NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, and NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube. Thanks to all of you for starting us off. Shaq, you have been there on the ground right in the middle of these protests for days now. Walk us through what you're seeing and hearing today.
Look, there's still a lot of frustration. There's still a lot of anger. There's a sentiment that the shooting that we even saw last night is just reinforcing the will for people to come out in what is the frigid, cold temperatures. I'll let you just take a look at the scene that we have here outside of the federal building. This has become somewhat of an ICE headquarters here in St. Paul, though pretty close to Minneapolis. You see every once in a while federal agents will go inside and you'll hear the crowd jeer at them, make it known that they don't. And, you know, I was at the site where we saw a lot of that chaos last night where the shooting happened, and I talked to some people. I saw, I saw investigators going through looking for more evidence from the state, but I saw community members coming out and cleaning up, picking up some of those canisters that were lodged, the tear gas, the pepper spray. I want you to listen to a conversation I had with one of them about the mood and feeling here on the ground in Minneapolis.
I think a lot of people have described it or asked if it's feeling chaotic here, and I disagree. I think that what they're doing is chaotic, what ICE agents are doing is chaotic, but I feel like people are organized and brave and courageous, and I feel like we're winning against them, especially when you see people coming out.
All right, Shaq, thank you so much for your reporting from the ground there. Let me turn to Courtney and Julia. Let me start with you and this threat by the president to use and invoke the Insurrection Act. Walk us inside your conversations today. What are administration officials telling you about that threat?
Yeah, so why this is important is because this would give the president the authority to send troops to Minnesota to be involved, or, I mean, frankly, anywhere that he wanted to use them, but in this case, Minnesota. And they would be involved potentially in law enforcement functions. So we've been talking about the National Guard who've been sent to various cities around the country. If they are on federal duty, so activated federally, they cannot engage in any kind of law enforcement acts. If they're state National Guard, they can. D.C. is the outlier. I won't even get into that because that's just confusing. But when it comes to Minnesota, if he were to send federal troops, they could be involved in law enforcement. There are people, the concern is that that would be perceived as he is sending troops against the American people in the streets. So, but we do know that this is something the president has discussed in prior instances as well.
Well, so to follow up on that point, Courtney, he has talked about this before. How seriously are people taking this specific threat?
Anytime the president talks about the possibility of something, you have to take it seriously. Yeah. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but I mean, how many conversations have we had about the president talking about Maduro, and then look, they went in and carried it out? I mean, how many times has he threatened to send the National Guard, and then he has sent them? So we have to take it seriously if the president is discussing it. And also, if he's talking about it publicly, that means that he is having conversations with his senior staff behind the scenes. We know that there are people in his inner circle who are very much in favor of using the Insurrection Act in certain cases.
And Court, just quickly before I go to Julia, walk us through what the Insurrection Act actually looks like.
So it gives him the authority to send troops anywhere in the country that he wants to. You can see up there up on the screen, it's the Insurrection Act of 1807. Whenever the president considers that unlawful destruction, obstructions, combinations, or assemblage or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings. He may call into federal service, such as the militia of any state, and use the armed forces. This is me reading the law, but what it basically means is the president can send troops anywhere that he wants if he sees that there is a need and that the local authorities can't handle the situation.
Julia, pick up on that point.
It's interesting because part of the way it's written, it was either to suppress a rebellion, which would be the argument presumably he'd make in Minnesota, or it was to repel an invasion. So early on, before Trump took office, if you think about a year ago, we were talking about the Insurrection Act. It's something that had been floating during the campaign and the transition, but that's because we thought they were going to use military at the border to repel an invasion. This is not what anyone really had on their bingo card for the second Trump administration, that it would be within U.S. cities, as they're talking about now.
And talk about the way in which these ICE agents are being deployed. Is it within, right now, is it within their purview, or is there a big debate about that, obviously?
Well, ICE agents are acting within their purview in terms that it's okay to search them. We understand there are about 3,000 total federal agents, including ICE and Border Patrol, in Minneapolis. But what the local authorities there are arguing is that the tactics are unusual. Their presence is lawful. They have field offices that include this area and this region, and they've made arrests in the area before. But their tactics, when it comes to traffic stops, when it comes to profiling, when it comes to citizenship checks, we've seen videos of them going up to people seemingly at random, asking for documents, and then, of course, the crowd control tactics that Shaq is watching.
And you have new reporting on some concerns about their training?
Yeah, that's right. This is kind of wild. So there was an AI tool that they used when there was that huge surge to hire 10,000 new ICE officers between the time the One Big Beautiful Bill passed this summer and the end of 2025. So they used an AI tool to scrub applications, and anyone who had the word officer in their resume was labeled law enforcement experienced, even if it said, I aspire to be an ICE officer. That meant they did a 4-week virtual course rather than the 8-week in-person training that gets into things like firearms training, physical fitness test, legal classes. And so they were fast-tracked even without having law enforcement experience. Now ICE is having to go through manually, find out how many of these people were incorrectly sent to field offices without the training and pull them back and mandate they get the training they were supposed to have. We don't know, Kristen, though, how many of those people actually left their field offices to go out on the streets. We're hoping it was caught there, but at this point we just don't know.
It was just fascinating and one of the big pieces to this puzzle. Shaq, let me go back out to you because, again, there was this other ICE-involved shooting overnight there in Minneapolis. What can you tell us about that and the extent to which it's added to the tensions there?
I think it's definitely added to the tensions, and what we know, according to DHS, is that they were essentially, you had immigration officers essentially stopping someone, doing a traffic stop. They were trying to stop a Venezuelan immigrant, and they say in that traffic stop, the person fled. There was a scuffle at one point with one of the officers, and then they said two people came out of a nearby home and attacked this officer with a shovel, with a broom, and that is when the officer then opened fire. We saw some Facebook video of Facebook Live appearing to be from inside one of the homes, where a woman talked about someone who was inside their home was shot in the leg by ICE. That is something that we continue to follow and see what's going on with that. But one thing I noted is that when I was at the scene, you saw the state investigators going through, combing the scene. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. I think that is so notable because one of the flashpoints here in Minnesota has been the idea that they've been left out of the investigation into the shooting of Renee Good. Despite that, you saw that similar process happen at the scene where Renee Good was killed. So you have a sense where the local authorities are doing what they can, even if there's not that partnership between local law enforcement and the federal troops here. Or federal agents, excuse me, federal agents here.
Yeah, and Shaq, just finally, I know you had the chance to talk to the attorney representing the family of Renee Nicole Good. What can you tell us about that conversation?
A few key things. One, they are calling for a transparent investigation. They are encouraging the federal government to work with state and local law enforcement and investigators in this investigation, but they're also saying they are ready to conduct their own investigation as they consider a possible civil lawsuit connected to her death. But I think one thing that they kept wanting to emphasize, this is the attorney for the family of Renee Good, is that they want this to be about unity. They said her father, for example, was a Trump voter. Her mother, someone who was more, or I should say she was someone who was a little bit more liberal. They pointed that out to say they want this not to be caught up in the political debate. They don't want anyone to have violence or cause violence in her name. That was something they really wanted to emphasize, and they put the focus on her 3 young kids who are now without their mother. That is what they want the focus to be on right now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.